Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications. And with me, as always, is our good friend, Matt Fleming, PRI's Communications Director. How are you today, Matt?
Good. How are you, Tim?
Well, like me, I know you're ready to give our thoughts on who the big winners and big losers are from probably the biggest event to date in the 2026 gubernatorial race, and that's the big gubernatorial debate on the next star stations in California. In some ways, Matt and I watched, so you don't have to. Maybe let's kick off, to set the stage. We had six of the candidates were on the stage. Tom Steyer, Javier Becerra, Katie Porter, Matt Mahan, Chad Bianco, and Steve Hilton. And, it's probably not an exaggeration to say this was really the first time they've introduced themselves to a statewide TV audience. All the candidates kind of went in with here's what they wanted to do and here's what they wanted to avoid. So maybe, Matt, let's kick it off with our initial impression of the debate. Who to you was the night's big winner?
I think that's a hard one to answer because I don't know that anything really changed the dynamic. So I would say that whoever is in front is probably still in front. But having said that, the people in front, I don't think anything particularly great. So I don't know that I have a great answer for that one. I mean, to me personally, I thought Matt Mahan looked like a normal person, and that appeals to me. But I don't know that anyone else would agree with me on that. So to call him a big winner would maybe be a stretch. But I do think he was probably the least known of all the candidates up to this point. And that this probably gave to anybody paying attention who didn't already know him, this probably gave a pretty favorable first impression.
Well, I think you would look at it right of there's the debate, right, and the debate contest, and then with the viewers at home. And I think that Matt Mahan was hands down the clear winner of the debate. The way he answered the questions, the command of the issues, the dealing with realism, using the openings to talk about his strong points and the stories that he wanted to tell. I thought he was very polished, very smooth, had a very effective use of his time, really showed himself as kind of a center-left, problem-solving consensus builder. Now, the most important question of who's the biggest winner is among the voters, who stood out. And, I think we've had this discussion before, right? Is California as a whole, is the Democratic Party electorate looking for a candidate like Matt Mahan? And maybe in a top two environment, yes. For having to appeal to Democratic voters to make the top two, I don't know that what he said was the message they were looking for. So I think if you're a Democrat looking for, a true progressive fighter, I'd say of the four Democrats, as much as it pains me to say this, probably Katie Porter fared best among the four Democrats. To that audience, it seemed to me, certainly, maybe she had a little the opposite of that medication Joe Biden took to raise his energy level during the State of the Union addresses. But she seemed certainly on her best behavior and echoing the kind of progressive talking points that I think Democratic voters are looking for these days. On the Republican side, I mean, I think both of them fared well. But, again, in the room, on the debate, if you're scoring the debate contest, I think Steve Hilton clearly won among the two Republicans. But again, it's what are the viewers at home? How do they score it? How do the Republican voters watching score it? I wonder if Bianco didn't get the better of him because the answers, while, in some cases they weren't the most artfully delivered and crafted answers, he hit the kind of Republican themes and talking points that, Matt, you and I know regular Republican voters, regular Republican activists, that's how they talk. Those are the things they think about. It's the way they think about it. So, looking at it in that sense, at the end of the day, the big winner is who wins on June 2nd. And, I think from that score, probably Porter and Bianco.
Yeah.
Now, the flip side, who was the biggest loser in your mind?
See, And that's what I was going to say. Like, I don't think anybody really had a particularly bad night if I'm trying to look at it objectively. I mean, there are people who on that stage I loathe and people who I like, and I'm not going to necessarily get into who's who, but so setting us aside and just trying to grade it objectively, I don't think anyone had a terrible evening. So then to me, it seems like we are grading Biggest Loser based off of more intangible criteria. I think for me, the biggest losers are probably Steyer, Becerra, and Hilton. And I would say that only because they are arguably the three front runners in terms of the primary, and none of them really succeeded in pushing themselves forward in a meaningful way. You know, I agree with you that Katie Porter actually looked a lot less crazy than some of the than the leaked footage of her berating staff, or the woman who poured mashed potatoes on her ex's head. She didn't seem like that person. She seemed relatively normal. So I think she probably wouldn't count as the biggest loser because she actually probably shored up some weaknesses. But yeah, I mean, it's weird to say that people who I don't think did anything wrong were biggest losers, but I just don't think those three really did anything to differentiate themselves in a way that at this point they probably really want to.
I think there was a clear loser in the debate, and that was Javier Becerra. This was his moment. He had organically a significant amount of momentum, such that, he'd surged to the lead or close to the lead from being kind of way back in the lower middle of the pack. And this was his moment to show, hey, I'm the effective progressive leader Democrats need to lead the state forward. And I thought he missed on all of those fronts. He looked tired. He spoke in the kind of language of government. I don't think he had any real connection on the issues. I think if you're a Democrat looking for a fighter, sure, he can rattle off, his record of filing lawsuits, but I didn't think he inspired any confidence. If you're a liberal, if you're a progressive voter looking for a real champion and a real fighter. The other way that I think he was a loser, right, is that the key audience watching this debate last night was the Sacramento world. And there are real decisions about to be made of, what are certain constituencies going to invest in terms of time and manpower in the race and on whose behalf. And yes, he's been gaining organically in the polls, but not as much in the money, organizational, manpower front. And I think that entities that may have been on the fence about, hey, do we spend another $5 million on Matt Mahan? Do we split the difference and go with Steyer? I don't think any of those people were discouraged from that path. I don't think he won any real converts in that world, and he certainly didn't dissuade any of those interests from maybe changing course, keeping their powder dry, or even coming onto his team.
I think you're 100% right. I mean, he definitely showed why he's been a dud up to this point. I agree with you that I don't think he made any converts. I just wonder when people are looking at it, if you're establishment Sacramento, you'd look at him and, I don't think he did anything to make you think, oh, this, he's not like still the safe choice, because Katie Porter and Steyer are not really safe choices. If you want to shake things up, that's who you're looking for. If you want a safe choice that arguably will be a terrible governor, which might actually make him the worst choice, but he would appear safe, I think he's still your guy. But I'm with you. I mean, now we're trying to like game it out how the third house will respond, and I really just don't have a sense for that. But you're right. I mean, he gained all this organic traction, and I definitely think last night did nothing to keep that momentum going. Unless people are just like, I'm sick of the uncertainty. I'm just going to back this guy, even though he's been a dud everywhere he's gone.
Right. In the one sense, this was his moment, right? He'd been
Yeah.
getting interest, and I don't think he was impressive in any way. So if you
No.
were kind of this late bunch of voters that in the aftermath of Eric Swalwell thought, hey, well, I'm going to hang my hat with him, or I kind of like what I hear about him. Gosh, I don't know that you were impressed by that. And I think some of those voters may be looking for a different candidate after that debate. The next round of polling will be very telling
Mhm.
in that front. But we've kind of gone through Becerra in detail here, but let's go through the others one by one and kind of evaluate their performances. What did they do well? What didn't they do so well? Let's start with the front runner in his mind, Tom Steyer. What did he do well in your mind? What did he not do so well?
Of all of the debaters, he was the least articulate, but I think that that didn't necessarily hurt him because he's not pretending to be articulate. He's running as a non-politician, so it wasn't like he didn't sound intelligent. I mean, I think some of his ideas are not intelligent, but if we're just saying through the average person listening, he's not a dumb guy. He's obviously given some thought to what he wants to do if he were elected. So I think the fact that he wasn't particularly well spoken didn't really hurt him and may have even worked in his favor. The thing that he kept doing that made me crazy personally was the gas prices thing, which came up a few times, and he kept saying Donald Trump is raising your gas prices, or Donald Trump's the reason why gas prices are high. And like, there's no question that the Iran war has raised gas prices. That's a global phenomenon. It's not really up for debate. It is what's just happening. But if the war in Iran was done today, California would still have the highest gas prices in the country. And I guess what makes me so cynical about politics sometimes is that when Tom Steyer talks about I'm the change agent, which he said so many times, it just sounds like he's not the change agent. It sounds like he's going to give us the same old stuff we've been hearing forever. I'm sure that if he were elected, the first thing he'd do is launch some commission into the alleged gas mystery surcharge, and which has been done countless times and never really proven anything. And to me, he just seemed as crazy and atypical as some of his ideas are. He seems to me just another agent for the status quo.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I thought he came across kind of a fumbly, a little bit. Our older listeners will certainly recall Mr. Magoo. I thought he was a little kind of goofy like that. Most of the incoming fire he had to absorb. He was for the debate stage, right? He came across reasonably well. I didn't think he was that great, but the test with him, right, is he's an outsider. He's trying to show, hey, I've got a smart agenda. I understand how government works, even though I'm an outsider. And I think that's where he can kind of get himself into trouble, right? Or his really unrealistic proposals that he's talking about, the stuff about ICE, for example. Most of that plan that he talked about is blatantly unconstitutional. You can't do those things. You can't have state police arresting federal agents carrying out federal law. That's, I think, where, if you're going to present yourself as an outsider, you got to be kind of living with reality on what you want to do. And I think you can really hurt yourself with the more experienced candidates on the stage in this and future debates when you kind of talk about these fantastical things that just in no way are they going to happen. It's not as simple as that, to solve these problems. If it was that simple, well, many legislators and the governor would have done it already. We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
I got a question for you. I'm curious. I didn't remember to mention this when I was talking, but I do. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts were. Tom Steyer, for those who don't know, is the only billionaire running. Obviously, Democrats nowadays are very anti-billionaire. He's got to do a lot of work to get past that. You might remember a brilliant Matt Fleming column from not too long ago arguing that he doesn't need to wait to pay the wealth tax. He could just do it today. There's nothing preventing him. He has not yet taken me up on that amazing bit of political advice. But the debate moderator last night, Nikki Lorenzo, asked him that. She said, you say billionaires don't pay their fair share. You're more than welcome to pay more money. Have you done that? And he said, me paying more in taxes is not the answer. Tim, what did you think of that moment?
Well, we're going to be seeing a lot of that clip on television screens in the coming weeks. I mean, it shows just how out of touch and tone deaf he is. The other answer he had later about on housing, that he and his wife had some nonprofit that to try to prove that he had built things. They had some nonprofit that funded home construction. I mean, that's great, but I thought it kind of came across like Mitt Romney's binder full of women. It was a little like it's not very relatable, and that's great. You're a rich guy looking for credit for writing a check to something. I think it just all reinforced his, kind of billionaire out of touch status. There's definitely a different way that he looks at the world, and you can tell on that stage, despite his glaring white sneakers that he was wearing, that probably were the real winner of the debate. If you're a real progressive voter and you're concerned about his being a billionaire and being out of touch, I don't think those answers or anything he said that night dissuaded you from those concerns. Well, let's go through now some of the other candidates. Let's go through Katie Porter. I think she had a lot of work she had to do going onto the debate stage. And, starting with, she couldn't look crazy. She couldn't lose her cool. She couldn't yell at people. And so she clearly was counting to 10 backwards and, chanting her inner Tina Turner Buddhist chants and whatever she needed to do to calm herself down and keep her focused. She might have almost been too calm on the debate stage, but, I think she definitely did her homework, rehearsed her answers really to perfect timing. She wasn't, when the bell dinged, she wasn't going over time. The zingers she did drop were clever little bombs that were really more little truth moments rather than kind of negative shots. So I think, for someone who probably had the most work that needed to be done on the debate stage, I think she did it. And the question that has been going around town, right, of, well, why wouldn't Katie Porter get a second look in this race? Well, she may have a lot of people, who are progressive, true blue Democratic voters taking a second look at her. What do you think?
I think you're 100% right. She obviously prepared. She's a professor and a former member of Congress, so she's obviously pretty good at public speaking. As Tim, you and I have talked about, there's nothing, and I just, for the sake of full transparency for our listeners, there's nothing that she could ever do that would improve my opinion of her. So again, I'm trying to be as fair and objective as I can. I do think that she looked not crazy last night, and that's probably really good for her, and she might get a second chance as a result of that. Two things she did that really stood out to me. One was she was trying to ding Steve Hilton, I believe, on homelessness. Maybe it was both Hilton and Bianca who leaned heavily into homelessness as a drug addiction and mental health problem, which is true. It's not the whole picture, but it is definitely a significant part of the picture. And she said the majority of homeless people are actually working. And that stood out to me as a statement that can't possibly be true. And I Googled it, and it's not even remotely true. So that one was kind of amateurish. And then the other that stood out to me was, I don't even remember the question, but she started going on. Oh, when they asked her about her staff, she said she apologized to the staff member that she berated in that video. She didn't, but then she talked about how she was really good to her staff because during COVID, she paid for free COVID tests for staff. And then if you remember, at that time, she actually got in a lot of trouble for, again, being a horrible boss by firing someone who got COVID in her office. She got really mad because if you remember, people would get COVID, but they didn't necessarily know they had COVID, right? It wasn't always so obvious, and hence the testing. But she, berated the staff member, allegedly, of course. This one wasn't on camera, and then fired the staff member. And the internal, communications about it were like, "You got me sick. You came into my office and you got me sick." And the staff member's like, "I didn't know how. I didn't know, and I stopped coming in once I realized." But so she didn't mention any of that, and that kind of stood out to me. I forget that her history as a terrible boss goes on long before that one leaked video. But I don't know. I guess that's just I feel like my moral obligation to continue bringing her down a peg, but reminding voters of who she is. But anyway, sorry, I forgot. I get so lost in talking about Katie Porter. What was the question?
Well, I think we definitely can all agree whatever meds she was on were good meds last night. I think also remember one of the most infamous lines from the Julie Watts interview, right, was not looked like she was talking to a crazy person when she was asked, "Well, would you try to appeal across party lines?" And I think her little tisk tisk moment, her little truth bombs, if you will, that she dropped, certainly none of those were appealing across the party lines at all. And I think she showed, if you're a Republican voter, she definitely is not on your list of Democrats you would ever potentially think about voting for. But one who might is Matt Mahan. And we've talked about it a little bit. The question about who is his voter universe is a big one, and I think remains. But boy, I think no question, if you look at his performance, he was smart, he was relatable, he got his personal story out there in a natural way. It didn't seem contrived that politicians, always try to fit their little story into debate answers when it doesn't usually fit. He did a very good job on making it fit. He looked like a very reasonable, rational guy who could be a good governor. Again, I don't know if he'll go up in the polls after this. Certainly, I don't think, can't say that he hurt himself in any way, but I think that's the question, right? Is that does he gain in support at all after that performance? That was, I think most observers would probably agree, was probably the best on the debate stage. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, look, he does a lot of things that I personally value, right? Like he talked about when prompted, he talked about how he would, fight against Washington overreach, mentioning Trump by name a few times. And he's a California Democrat, so the fact that he would fight with Trump at all is sort of baked into the equation. But, states should fight with the federal government because the federal government overreaches all the time into states' rights. He doesn't really come off as he's not like a partisan warrior, which what is wrong with trying to govern for everyone? Trying to juggle the needs of the most left-wing progressive in San Francisco with the most, right-wing individualist in Modoc County. I mean, I don't know. If there was somebody that seems like they're trying to build a coalition, it's him. But I'm with you where it seems like on the left, everyone wants anti-Trump, all these progressive big solutions that don't really work and cost a lot of money. And on the right, people want to vote for a Republican and they want to vote really for a Republican. So I don't know where his lane necessarily is. Hopefully he finds one a bit more because California could probably do a lot worse than him. But yeah, man, I mean, he just came off as very polished, thoughtful, just really rehearsed, but still kind of authentic at the same time. And, I don't know.
And the irony, of course, right, is that if you want to make hay against Trump administration policies or try to turn the page, well, what he's doing would actually be an effective way to do it, a strategic way to do it. It's not screaming and shouting, which is what many voters want to see, which is what the other candidates on the stage would probably be better at.
Yeah, that's it. That's a quote. Actually, yeah, he said that last night. He said the best way to fight Trump is by delivering results. And like, look, I think a lot of the Democrat policies a lot of the times don't make sense and won't work. But I mean, if they're going to solve homelessness and prove us wrong, great. Prove me wrong. I think he's exactly right. I'm going to prove that I'm right by delivering results. I wish more people had that attitude. I'm not trying to convince people of him or not convince people of him, but that attitude that like I'm going to win by succeeding is a great attitude. Whereas too often we hear on both sides, I'm going to win by screwing the other person.
Let's talk about the Republicans. So let's talk about Chad Bianco first. I think it was probably the first time nearly all Californians had seen him. He certainly wasn't the most polished of debaters, but I think that the answers he gave, while it offended the liberal sensibilities of the other candidates on the stage, particularly when they got into the row about race, I think your average Republican voter would listen to his answers and say, yeah, I could picture a lot of heads bobbing in agreement with what he had to say. Yeah, it was kind of crude and not very sophisticated an answer to say, basically the reason we have all the problems we have today on crime or cost of living or all of these are the Democrats and Democrat policies. I think most Republican voters heard that and like, yeah, that's exactly right. Someone's telling it like it is. Someone's telling it as I would say it. And, I wonder if he got himself some additional fans from the Republican viewers at home with what he had to say and the way he presented it. What do you think?
So I'd had a very limited sample of, Sheriff Bianco up to this point, and a lot of what I get is in writing. So I don't get to hear him talk a lot, and I don't get to, in writing you see the little quote and some paraphrases, but you don't hear the context. And I'm with you. I mean, I think it was clear to me why he's had such staying power on a very limited campaign up to this point. Like he does make a lot of sense. And yeah, he's not particularly articulate, but he's like he's the Riverside sheriff. I don't expect them to be some extremely polished candidate. He kind of comes off as kind of cowboyish, and it's an authenticity that works for him. He had some answers that maybe didn't help him, even if it's not exactly what he meant. But when they talked about an issue that I really hadn't paid much attention to, but a police officer, I believe in San Francisco, had pulled over a truck driver and had given them some sort of like, as they were putting it, an English speaking test, but he was really seeing if if the driver could describe, what the difference in the signs were. And the discussion lacked context, which Bianco mentioned. And he was like, when Becerra said, that's racial profiling and it's racist. And Bianco was like, I'm sick of everyone making everything about racism, or let's not make this about racism. And I got his point because they were making it about racism when it's clear the cop is making it about, for whatever reason, he pulled him over. I'm sure it had to do with the fact that the guy was not obeying street signs. And then when he is asking him questions and the guy can't respond, it makes sense that he would start asking him, hey, do you know what this sign means? And he's giving him pictures. So if there is a language barrier, he can at least say, the stop sign, he knows the image and he can say that stop or whatever. I don't think it was a particularly good way of putting that answer, but on its merit, he's right. I mean, cops have a duty to figure out if the person driving that they just pulled over is capable of driving, and again, it's not an issue I've felt a lot, so I have to pay more attention to it, but just on its merit, he just seems to make a lot of sense a lot of the time.
And that's why I say I could see a lot of Republican voters' heads nodding along with the things that he had to say. And, it kind of goes into the challenge that the final candidate, Steve Hilton, does have, in that his aim is to put Bianco away, that he's clearly in first place. And I think Bianco probably got himself several more followers watching that debate. Hilton, as we mentioned earlier, I thought he did a fine job. He showed he had a command of the facts and the workings of government when he was challenged on, the gas and oil permitting. He had a very granular detail on how that works and who's the permitting agency and what he would do. It's an entity called CalGEM that does that, and that's been a scandal that we've written about here at PRI in recent months. Hilton had the best kind of zingers for the Democratic candidates. The line that he had about when Katie Porter gave Gavin Newsom a B minus or whatever she said on homeless policy, and she said, "I'm a tough grader," and then he said, "Boy, I'd love to take your class." I mean, that's tough grading, for a guy who clearly has failed on the job. But I think ultimately, when you're looking at Hilton, right, it's did he accomplish what he wanted to accomplish, which was to kind of put Bianco away? And I don't think he did that at all.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, he's obviously an impressive public speaker. I thought he missed kind of a moment. Becerra attacked him for saying he's never really run a government before. And I mean, he was a top policy advisor to David Cameron, so he helped run a country, a successful country, mind you. So I thought he missed a little bit of an opportunity to kind of push back there. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think he did enough to differentiate himself. But he was very, very good. Very good. Yeah.
When we were talking about Becerra, that's the argument you would make. That's such a Washington, Sacramento insider way of thinking. And I think most voters, even progressive voters, right, they believe in the power of individuals to be able to make change. And sometimes you don't need experience to do it. Maybe sometimes experience is the problem. And so I think that kind of it emphasized one of Becerra's weaknesses, right, is that he's a career politician. He's been in office since 1991. And oh, by the way, if you read the Washington gossip books, Secretary Becerra's tenure as HHS secretary isn't exactly universally praised. So, experience can cut both ways. We'll get back to next round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. Let's look at some of the big themes that the candidates were asked about. And I think the biggest one, right, was cost of living. There were several questions about certainly gas prices, housing costs, taxes. How do you think the candidates fared here? Did any one candidate address these issues particularly well, or maybe not so much? What what stood out to you?
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about housing in particular as a cost of living issue, and I don't believe I heard anyone mention sequel reform. I don't even think I heard the Republicans mention it. Now, granted, that is in an environment where you've got 30 seconds to answer. Sequel reform is not exactly, the thing you hang your hat on because it requires more than 30 seconds to explain it. But that's arguably the biggest impediment in building more housing. It's the law that, for our listeners who might not know, it's the law that environmentalists and unions and NIMBYs use to block pretty much every development or drag it out for decades. Steve Hilton talked about impact fees. Impact fees really drive up the cost of housing. Mahan talked about permitting reform and shortening permitting times. I like that. I really can't remember too many other things people said. I know that Becerra had just an absurd idea that he was going to freeze utility rates and homeowners insurance premiums, which is just a remarkably stupid, respectfully stupid idea. It does nothing to change the inputs that are causing those prices to go through the roof. No one could really. Mahan was willing to suspend the gas tax. They all had kind of like wishy-washy answers. Not the Republicans, but they all had kind of wishy-washy answers about gas taxes and VMT taxes, and I don't know. It just a lot of again, to bring it back to Mahan, like he just gave. I can't think of too many times he gave vague, wishy-washy answers, and I found that refreshing. I don't think Hilton really did much either, and I don't think Bianco did much either. Becerra gave just ridiculous answers. Steyer gave some wishy-washy answers, as did, of course, Katie Porter did.
Well, I think, on that point about, they started out the debate with the question about the gas tax and vehicle miles tax. And it just is so objectively false and silly to claim that it's just get rid of Donald Trump and you lower gas prices. And they completely ignored, hey, actual policy enacted in California and supported by probably all four Democratic candidates on the stage, the reason why we pay an extra $1.30 to $1.50 per gallon. Then let alone the supply issues that Steve Hilton talked about. So I just thought that collectively, even among many Democratic voters out there, I think there'd be a sense of, and what really Mahan spoke to, right, is the working class. It's a real divide. It's less a partisan divide. It's more kind of a middle class, working class divide with the governing class in Sacramento. And I think Katie Porter doubled down on, but we've got to do this on climate change and da 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 da. That's great. These people can't eat. They can't afford to have gas to drive to work and school. And so, yeah, your commitment to climate change is admirable, but you've got to have a realistic policy that doesn't punish those who can ill afford to pay these exorbitant prices. I think they looked out of touch there quite a bit. Another thing that the candidates were kind of grilled on, right, is that everybody during the night kind of had an uncomfortable question they were forced to face. Katie Porter was asked about her kind of horrible boss's reputation. Matt Mahan was asked about his support from Silicon Valley billionaires. Chad Bianco was asked about his kind of bizarre thing about seizing ballots recently, and then he kind of backed down right after he seized the ballot. How do you think the candidate fared addressing these uncomfortable moments? Did anyone do a particularly good job or kind of reinforce the weakness of the question? How do you think the candidates face these tough questions really about things of their own doing?
Again, I think Katie Porter, although what she said lacked a lot of historical context about how much of a horrible boss she's actually been, I thought she addressed it pretty well. If you do no digging, she addressed it pretty well. Bianco, I don't think handled it particularly well. Although I will say that when he was asked about it, they said, "Are you, if you don't like these election results, meaning if you don't win this election, are you going to challenge them and say that they're illegitimate and seize more ballots?" And he did get offended by that. And I kind of went back and forth on it because it definitely looked offensive, but also the question does imply that he's doing this because he thinks it's all fake. And the question itself assigns a motive to why he's doing what he's doing. He claims that there was legitimate concerns about miscounted ballots, and he said they were just going to audit them. Now I don't know if those concerns were true or not, but on its face it sounds reasonable enough. And then he got really really defensive. I thought Mahan handled it well. They also asked him when they said that his competitors said that his desire to suspend the gas tax was, as a quote, not a serious proposal. I thought he handled that really well. He just didn't look defensive. Steyer, we already talked about it when they brought up him being a billionaire and not paying more in taxes, gave the worst possible answer. And then again, for the Republican candidates, especially Hilton, it seems like every question is always somewhat kind of hostile. I'm not assigning any sort of motives to the interviewers. I'm just saying that, like, so often the questions in these debates are framed towards we need the government to do something. And Republicans, especially conservative Republicans, often think that we don't need the government to do something. So it always kind of puts them sort of in a weird way. And I thought Hilton handled all that really, really well. And for the most part, I thought Bianco handled it well, just not that one question.
Yeah, he definitely looked nutty when talking about the seizing of the ballots. It's kind of a fumbly long explanation. He may have a very valid beef there, but I don't think he really explained himself well in that scenario. Yeah, I think that's right. Other than that kind of fumbly Bianco answer on the ballots, I think everyone other than Steyer avoided having a soundbite you could use in future commercials, which is, of course, the goal when answering tough questions on the debate stage. But I think kudos to the moderators for kind of asking those questions and coming back to them, and asking them to make a stand. I thought another kind of grilling question that they got, is grilling for the Democrats, right, is the uncomfortableness of grading Gavin Newsom on homelessness. It's kind of a silly thing, and really showed, when we're talking about quality of life, right? I mean, I think most voters look at what we're doing on homelessness as a state and think it's been a complete waste of money, that they see homelessness worse than ever before. And, I think that they did not acquit themselves well when even a Matt Mahan, right, who was willing to consider that, Newsom has not been the most effective governor on these issues. He broadened the answer and said it's all of us, and I appreciate the humility. But, if elected officials A is doing a bad job, we'll say it. I think most people would expect that. And it kind of reminds me, one of my favorite lines, Matt, that I always recite when I have the chance to, is Judge Judy, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. And I think that was a lot of, I think that's how regular people think when you talk about homelessness. And these folks were just about spending more money and, creating new programs and all of that. And I think most regular people want homeless cleared up off the street. So I think on those questions, most of the Democratic candidates did not acquit themselves well. When we're on the subject of the moderator, it's a challenge to have a debate with six people and A, keep control, and B, have it where you actually hear something and learn something from the candidates. You know, it's not just 15 seconds here, 15 seconds there. So how do you think the two moderators, Nikki Lorenzo from Fox 40 here in Sacramento and Frank Buckley from KTLA in Los Angeles, how do you think they did in moderating the debate? Did they keep everybody in line, or did they kind of act like they were fellow candidates at times?
I thought they did a good job. You know, they asked follow-ups. They didn't ask more than one follow-up, which at times some of these debates can get a little unruly. Look, if the person doesn't want to answer and they want to dodge the question, I don't think it's very good for the debate to sit there and keep hammering them on it. You can maybe point out, okay, well, that just sounds like you're not answering it, I guess, which they didn't really do. I thought they did a really good
Answer the
job.
question, answer the question,
Yeah,
answer the
yeah.
question, answer the question.
Yeah, yeah. Because oftentimes it comes off as like it only attacking one side too. Having said that, I thought that the debaters themselves did a good job of being respectful of time, largely answering questions. I mean, so often in the last, 15 years, debate moderators, particularly in presidential elections, get criticized, and some of it's fair and some of it's unfair. But, what doesn't get criticized is that the candidates have gone off the rails. I thought last night people did a good job of trying to have a substantive debate, and I thought the debate moderators did a good job of asking good questions. I think they, as you mentioned, they gave at least one question to try to make each person a little uncomfortable, which is good. And some of the best questions were the ones that they asked from the audience, which doesn't surprise me because these journalists, they're so used to they're insiders, right? And that's not an insult. It's just it's their life 24/7. And sometimes it's easy to remember or easy to forget that your average person living in Folsom or Sunnyvale or whatever might have a different way of asking and a different take on it. And I thought they did a really good job bringing those in. So I don't know. I like what they did. I think they did a good job.
I agree. I thought it was probably the most substantive debate that I can remember watching in years. I think you learned a lot about the candidates. I think you got fairly decent, substantive answers from all of the candidates on virtually all the questions. Yeah, there was some ducking. That's to be expected. There was a little bit of talking over one another, not a lot. But I thought that, and I think it's credit to both of the moderators. They really kept everybody on track, and they kept the conversation moving forward. And I think, if you're a voter, you haven't seen these candidates before, you're certainly undecided. Boy, I think you learned a lot about the different candidates watching that debate. So the moderators of the upcoming CNN debate certainly have their work cut out for them in comparison to put on, a debate in the caliber of what we had this week. So, kind of close our discussion of the debate now that we've kind of batted around, who did well and who didn't do so well. Do you think the debate changed the trajectory of the race in any way? Are we still in kind of this state of flux of great fluidity that we've seen all throughout the race and certainly since Eric Swalwell dropped out? Do you think the debate served to kind of sort some of these things out?
If I may, real quick, just you talked about the grading of Newsom, and I'll just make this quick. I didn't hate Matt Mahan's answer because the truth is, state law is fought by cities and counties. I know in Placer County, they've been talking about building this homeless shelter and where to put it for the last, I don't even know, 10 years, something like that. So there is some truth to the fact that state law is not popular in a lot of the local governments. And he did give the overall effort a D. But it did strike me, and Tim, your memory is better than mine. But 8 years ago, when we were having these same debates, I'm pretty sure all the issues were the exact same, and I can't think of any real change on any of them, or any real progress. And it just strikes me that all of these Democrats want to be change agents, yet at the same time talking about what a great job Newsom did. I think Mahan did the best job of distancing himself from Newsom, although he was complimentary where I guess he thought it was warranted. But Newsom's done a bad job. And the state hasn't moved forward. And, these guys want to change stuff because people are sick of the results. Well, you can't have it both ways. Anyway, it's just my thought on the grades. But to go back to what we were talking about earlier. I'm not sh The only thing that I think could possibly have changed about last night is if Matt Mahan actually broke through, which who knows, or if B, a lot of insiders are like, I'm just sick of the uncertainty. I'm gonna back Becerra. I don't love him. I don't like him, but he seems safe enough to me. I could sort of see that. I think Katie Porter shored up her faults to a bit, but I don't know that that's necessarily going to bring people to her side. And Steyer has been sort of stuck in the same point for a really, really long time. I don't know that this really changed much. And the Republicans, I thought they did a good job, but as we know, they have an uphill battle to begin with. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think on the Republican side, I actually would say I could see Bianco gaining from this debate. Not that Hilton did bad in any way, but think the regular Republican voter introduced to him for the first time, a lot of what he had to say, I think will resonate with them. And yeah, they may or may not know Steve Hilton or like Steve Hilton. We know a million people like this. Gone to events, a million events like this. I think how he talked and what he said is very appealing to a regular Republican audience. For the rest of the field, I think the biggest takeaway for me is Katie Porter probably stopped the bleeding, maybe even reverse some of the damage a little bit. Now, she's been stuck at, 9 or 10 or 11. Maybe she'll go up a little bit after this. I don't think any of the others, and I think the other question to me is Becerra gave such a really poor performance in my view. Does that stop his rise? Well, would that gain, that organic gain in support that he's seen in recent days, does that prove to be well, really not very strong, and that some of those people are now going to peel off having seen this performance? I think those are the two. The Mahan question is the question of the race. He's got the money, the appeal, all the things that on paper, you would need. The question is what he is selling, is that what Democratic voters, enough of them want?
So
And we don't
can
know
I
the answer to that question yet.
let me ask you a question off that because I agree with you about about Becerra. I think he was terrible, and I don't think that he inspired really anyone. I think people might go to him as the safe choice. Having said that, I don't disagree with where you're coming from. My question to you would be, so I think where Becerra might sort of be the last stop is like the people who would support him don't like Mahan, and they already have passed on what's her name, Katie Porter and Tom Steyer as being a little too radical or a little too whatever, extra, as the kids would say. Where would you, if Becerra's momentum is blunted and even regresses a little bit, where would you say is the natural next step for those people to go?
Well, the insider world, right? I think the questions on the table are we going to write the next $5 million check to Mahan or give up? I think they will write the next $5 million check to Mahan now after that performance. The people on the fence about, well, we want to stop Steyer and Porter, I think they still don't know what to do. I think you're right, that if Becerra had had a really good performance, I think they would have gone in for him. But see, I think a lot of those interests, right, they could go for Mahan or Becerra. I don't know that I would agree with the premise that they've rejected Mahan. I think the rejection is he hasn't shown yet that he's a winner. I think if he can show in the polls that he's gaining, I think some of those groups could come for him. I think the biggest problem for Becerra is that the would-be people who might have come to his coalition now are going to have second thoughts. He needed to have a strong debate performance to reassure those people or seal the deal. And I think those people are going to remain on the sidelines. So I think a lot of these people, I don't think they go anywhere this week. The voter, that's the real question. I don't know that voters have rejected Mahan because I don't think they know Matt Mahan.
Yeah,
So, this
that's a
could be
good
their
point.
first introduction to him. Maybe he does go up. We were talking earlier, right, about if you were to measure their statewide name ID, I bet all these people would be very low, probably, 30% or less. So, I think that's to me, the takeaway for what does the voter as a whole do after watching these candidates on the stage. A lot of it is this is the first time seeing him. And so, maybe our conventional wisdom isn't so conventional this year.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it.
Well, we can't leave our discussion this week without a little bit of talk about the departure of Betty Yee from the governor's race. And, we're sorry to see her go. She might be the winner of our annual award, the Sorry to See You Go award, because she is a smart and honest liberal, as conservatives might say. What's her impact, if any, been on the race? What impact will her departure have on the field? She did endorse Tom Steyer in the day after her departure from the race. Does her leaving change the race in any way?
I don't think so. She really didn't have a whole lot of support. I will say that I she started calling herself Boring Betty, and I personally kind of like it. I think our governor should be a little bit boring and just shut up and do your job and don't dazzle me with all your weird social media posts. So that message sort of appeals to me. I would have never voted for her for lots of reasons, but I did appreciate what she was trying to bring to the race, even if it was sort of like a flailing last ditch effort. I think that the endorsement of Steyer was bizarre and sort of off-brand and a little disappointing. She's like, I'm boring Betty, I'm slow and steady, and now I'm going to endorse the guy who says he's going to shake up literally everything. It just seemed like kind of off-brand and disappointing. Although it's hard for her to disappoint me since I was never a big supporter in the first place. But if we are operating in the reality that one of these Democrats might actually be the next governor, she would not have been at the bottom of my list of ones I couldn't live with. I mean, she seemed like she could have been tolerable at times on certain issues. And so her not being in the race and having no more shot at winning is sad when you consider some of the alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's hard to divide up 0% support, so I don't think it really has an impact on the race, other than, she could serve as a validator for Steyer in some quarters, because whether you support her or not, she is known as very competent, experienced person, a truth teller, especially on matters of public finance. You'd be hard pressed to find really a more respected liberal expert on public finance issues in California. So I think as a validator, she could be a quite good one. So, as we close out here, our final question: what should we be looking out for? What will you be looking out for in the race in the week ahead?
I think you're right about, next polling will be revealing. Certainly people have internal polling going right now. And I'll say this, of all the gubernatorial elections, or really all the elections we've had in a long time, particularly ones inside the state, this one has been the best one for lovers of oppositional research. So I'm always looking to see what new scandals come out next and what things people are starting to hammer home.
That's right. That's right. I agree. I think to me, the next thing that I'll be interested to see, they come out today, and you'll be reading the news about, they're due today, and you'll be reading the news about them. The campaign finance report: who's got money, who doesn't, who has raised more money based on the dropout of Eric Swalwell and Betty Yee, who hasn't. Because remember, the election starts now. We're going to get ballots mailed out. I believe it's May 4th. And so if you don't have a lot of money in the bank right now, how are you going to reach the voters who are going to be casting votes starting in just about 10 days or so? So that to me is what I'm watching in the week ahead. And with that, we want to thank everybody for listening to this week's episode of Next Round, and we hope you'll come back again and join us next week. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about the governor's race and all the different developments next week. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope you'll come back next week for another episode of Next Round.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.